Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling instances in Ozark Mountain history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. What locations and what hours of the day or night these recorded accounts reach are of interest to us. A local hunter from Tenney County, Missouri discovered what he first believed to be an animal carcass close to the White River on a chilly November morning in 1897. Overgrown with moss and partially hidden by fallen leaves, the discovery would subsequently be recognized as a collection of oddly organized human remains. They were carefully placed in what seemed to be a purposeful arrangement rather than dispersed as one might anticipate from animal involvement. James Wilkins, the hunter, alerted the county sheriff right away. The investigation that followed would go mostly unrecorded for decades, confined to private discussions among neighborhood residents and unreadable county documents that accumulated dust until they were discovered in 1962 by a university researcher. The Harper farmhouse, a secluded estate tucked away in the heavily forested hills about 14 miles southeast of Branson, was where the bodies were found. After moving there from eastern Tennessee in 1881, the Harper family had made it their home. Thomas Harper paid what at the time was regarded as an unusually low price for 120 acres of densely forested land, according to land records submitted to the county clerk's office. This seemingly unimportant information would eventually become a subject of interest for those looking into the Harper case. The farm's former owner, a man called Jeremiah Caldwell, had apparently departed the region abruptly, informing neighbors merely that the acreage wasn't right for raising livestock. Thomas Harper came with his wife Eliza and their 5 kids: Martha, 15, Joseph, 12, Rebecca, 9, Samuel, 6, and William, 17. According to census records, Thomas identified himself as a carpenter and bone trader. The latter title was not particularly noteworthy at the time, because gathering and selling animal bones for industrial and fertilizer purposes was a typical way for frontier families to augment their income. What was uncommon, though, was the Harper family's exclusive concentration on this one profession. A ridge that partially obscured the Harpers' farmstead from the morning sun allowed them to establish it in a small valley. There weren't many neighbors. The Peterson family owned the nearest farm, which was about 3 miles to the north. Mary Peterson, who was in her 82nd at the time, told the Tenney County Historical Society in 1951 that the Harpers kept to themselves in a way that wasn't normal, even for mountain folk. She said that although Thomas Harper would occasionally go to the general store in Forsyth for supplies, the rest of the family was rarely seen in town. Mary said that when they did show up, they were unnaturally pale, like people who lived underground. Thomas told the county that his wife was educating the Harper children at home, so they did not go to the neighborhood school. Despite numerous invites from the pastor, the family never showed up for services, according to church records from the Forsyth Baptist Church. Given that many mountain families continued to retain some degree of distance from local institutions, this social isolation was not especially out of the ordinary for the period and location. However, Thomas Harper's alleged conduct during his rare encounters with the villagers did cause some alarm. According to a store ledger from Forsyth General Merchandise that has been saved in the county historical records, Thomas frequently bought odd amounts of lye, vinegar, and salt, all of which are needed to prepare and preserve bones. And record dated October 1893 was more telling, stating that Thomas had ordered a number of medical textbooks on human anatomy on special order, paying with a pouch of silver coins instead of the usual shop credit or barter. In the margin of the ledger, Edwin Mitchell, the storekeeper, wrote, "Harper claims books for educating children, paid in Spanish silver." Wouldn't say where it came from. This notation would later become important when investigators found that several travelers who had been reported missing in the area had been carrying Spanish currency that they had obtained while conducting business in the Southwest Territories. Because the Harper family was isolated, neighbors found it hard to distinguish the pattern of life on the Harper homestead. But according to Eliza Harper's journal, which was found in 1962 while the old Harper property was being renovated, the family's days were centered around what she called the collection. The book, which is fragmented and water damaged, has entries from 1,891 to 1,898. 1896. Eliza outlines a daily routine in these pages that involved organizing, cleaning, and preserving bones. The 17th of June, 1893. Entry states, Thomas returned with new specimens today. The children helped with the cleaning. William shows particular skill with the smaller pieces. Thomas says he has natural hands for the work. Martha refused to assist again. Thomas had words with her in the cellar. She has been quiet since. The context clearly indicates that these specimens were not solely animal in origin, even if the journal never states this officially. Eliza often refers to special collections that needed to be handled with greater care and were kept apart from what she referred to as the common stock. It seems that these particular collections were maintained in a root cellar under the main home, which was accessed by a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. Mary Peterson said that on quiet nights, she heard odd noises emanating from the Harper farm. When a neighbor inquired about the noises, Thomas Harper allegedly explained them away as the wind in the hollow trees or coyotes in the distance. Most neighbors, used to the peculiar acoustics of the mountains and unwilling to meddle in another family's affairs, accepted these explanations. She described them as not quite animal, not quite human, a kind of wailing that carried across the valley. When William, the Harper family's eldest son, unexpectedly showed up in Forsyth in the spring of 1896, it marked a sea change in their remote life. The village physician, Dr. Samuel Thornton, described William as being in a very agitated state, his clothes filthy, and his demeanor unpredictable. Instead of penning a message, he started sketching elaborate designs of what seemed like skeleton structures with odd annotations after requesting paper and pencil. William grew more agitated as doctor. Thornton tried to interview him, and eventually he passed out from what appeared to be tiredness. William refused to talk about his family or why he had come to town while he was under Dr. Thornton's care for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Dr. Thornton discovered William's room unoccupied, the window open, and a 5-word note on the bed that read, "They collect more than bones." The doctor alerted Sheriff Robert Garland right away, and 2 deputies were sent to the Harper homestead to look into the matter. The deputies discovered what appeared to be an abandoned property, according to the official report made on the 18th of April, 1896. Meals were half eaten on the table. Personal things were still there, and the house was unlocked, all of which suggested a hurried departure. The root cellar's finding, however, was the most unsettling. According to the report, the room is set up in the manner of a museum or study, with shelves surrounding the walls holding hundreds of bones that have been painstakingly labeled with places and dates. Although many of the items on the shelves look like animal remains, the deputies pointed out that some of the specimens raise serious questions about their provenance. The report doesn't go into any detail, but a 1959 discovery of a private letter written by Deputy James Connor to his brother offers more information. In his letter, Connor states, "What we found beneath that house will haunt me until my dying day." The larger specimens were clearly marked with names, not just dates. Some I recognized as belonging to travelers reported missing over the years. Thomas Harper wasn't just collecting bones. He was collecting people. And the worst part, the part I can scarcely bring myself to write, is that some of the specimens showed signs of having been prepared while still. I cannot finish this thought, even on paper. The entire Harper family had disappeared without a trace, so no arrests were made right once despite the unsettling revelation. For several days, a search party led by Sheriff Garland searched the nearby forests but was unable to locate them. When James Wilkins made his discovery close to the White River in November 1897, the case was still open but idle. Eventually, it was determined that the remains discovered by Wilkins belonged to Thomas and Eliza Harper, as well as their children Joseph, Rebecca, and Samuel. Their deaths occurred soon after the deputies' visit to the homestead, according to forensic analysis, which was crude by today's standards but indicated they had been dead for about a year. Their layout, with their skulls facing inward and arranged in a circle, suggested ritual importance as opposed to careless disposal. The remains of the two oldest children, William and Martha Harper, were conspicuously missing from the discovery. Since no one knew where they were, there was conjecture that they may have been the cause of the other family. The diary, which was kept between 1894 and 1896, gave a startling account of Harper family life. The entry reads, "Father says each skeleton tells a story and that he is preserving these stories for future generations. Mother helps him prepare them, using techniques Father learned from a book he keeps locked in his trunk. William has begun to assist as well, showing an enthusiasm that frightens me. Yesterday, he asked Father if different types of people have different bone structures. The way he looked at me as he asked made my blood run cold." Martha explained how her father had gradually switched his bone-collecting activities from animals to humans, starting with remains found by accident travelers who had perished from exposure or accidents in the remote terrain, and then moving on to more purposeful acquisitions. According to Martha's journal, she and William had agreed to leave the property, but they couldn't agree on how to handle their younger siblings. The journal ends abruptly, leaving the events that followed up to speculation. The last entry, dated the 10th of April 1896, simply reads, "William has gone to town. I was supposed to wait for his signal, but I can't leave the little ones behind. Not after what I overheard Father telling William last night. I've decided what must be done." Investigators in 1962 postulated the following timeline based on the facts at hand. Martha addressed her parents out of concern for the protection of her younger siblings, which led to a violent altercation that claimed the family's lives. After arranging their remains in the ceremonial arrangement that led to their eventual discovery, she vanished herself. Surprisingly little public attention was given at the time to the discovery of the Harper family's remains. On the 3rd of December 1897, the Springfield Republican published a brief note stating that the bones of a frontier family had been found in Tenney County with foul play suspected. No other articles were published, and it seemed that officials had closed the case. This absence of a public record helped the Harper case remain obscure until it was rediscovered decades later. Oral histories from the area, however, preserved stories that were not recorded in official documents. Tenney County people told stories about the Bone family for generations, according to interviews done by Dr. Eleanor Kaufman in the early 1960 seconds. A strange feature that was not included in any official records was frequently stated in these accounts. Each Harper's body was found with a tiny bone from another family member placed inside their mouth, although it is impossible to confirm decades later. This detail points to a ritualistic element to their deaths that is consistent with Martha's journal entries regarding her father's views about the power found in bones. In the Ozarks, the winter of 1897-1898 was especially severe, with a lot of precipitation and extended cold temperatures. Tenney County had almost constant snow cover from mid-December to late February, according to historical meteorological records. Several isolated homesteads during this time reported odd occurrences, including windows that had been carefully removed and replaced without shattering the glass, livestock discovered with precise, surgical-like incisions, and one instance of a sleeping child waking to discover someone using a piece of string to measure their limbs methodically. As if the visitor had purposefully obstructed their path, tracks in the snow in each case led into the woodland, but vanished after a short distance. These occurrences mostly took place within 15 miles of the former Harper farmstead, but they were never formally linked to the Harper case. When spring arrived and the winter snow melted in March 1898, they came to an abrupt end. Although no verified sightings of William or Martha were reported, others conjectured that they had briefly returned to the region before leaving. About 60 miles south of the Harper homestead, in the little Arkansas hamlet of Mountain Home, a woman who fit Martha's description arrived in the spring of 1898. She lived in a little cottage on the outskirts of town and gave her name as Margaret Wilson, according to town records. She claimed to have received the skills from her grandmother in Tennessee and offered her services as a bone setter and midwife. After initially doubting her abilities, the town doctor eventually recognized her exceptional ability to cure intricate fractures and dislocations. In a letter to a doctor in Little Rock, he stated, "Miss Wilson possesses an understanding of skeletal anatomy that surpasses many formally trained physicians. Her methods for realigning broken bones are unorthodox, but remarkably effective. Most curious is her insistence on being compensated not with money, but with what she terms specimens, typically small bones from butchered animals, though I have heard she has requested to keep certain pathological specimens from her human patients as well." After staying in Mountain Home for almost 14 months, Margaret Wilson abruptly left in the summer of 1899. She mostly stayed to herself while she was there, but other residents remembered her special interest in gathering and conserving animal skeletons, which she said she studied for medical reasons. One whole room was devoted to these specimens, arranged in what one local carpenter who assisted her in installing shelves in her cabin described as a most systematic and unnerving manner. Shortly after Wilson left Mountain Home, a similar woman appeared in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, under the name Marion White. Once more, she provided services as a midwife and healer with a specialization in skeletal issues. Over the next 3 decades, this pattern would recur throughout the Ozark region. A single woman with extraordinary bone knowledge would show up in a small community, stay there for a few months to a few years, and then abruptly disappear, frequently after mysterious deaths in the area. William Harper's path, meanwhile, went in a different way. According to Greene County, Missouri, county records show that a young man named William Smith bought a small piece of land outside of Springfield in late 1896. According to tax documents, the property includes a house and a workshop. Smith's job title is listed as articulator of specimens, which is a technical word for a person who puts together skeletal exhibits for educational or medical purposes. Smith's workshop was enlarged in 1899 and again in 1902, suggesting that his business was doing well. In a 1900 business directory, there is an advertisement for Smith's Articulated Specimens, Precision Preparations for Medical Education, which offers complete human and animal skeletal assemblies of the highest quality. Smith's specialty was listed as rare pathological specimens and comparative anatomical displays, indicating that he focused on skeletal structures that were unusual or abnormal. This link to William Harper is very strong because of a fact from a 1901 Springfield police report. After visiting Smith's workshop to commission a skeletal exhibit for the school, a medical student from a local institution reportedly voiced concerns about him. The pupil claimed to have seen a fleeting glimpse of Smith's private collection when he opened the door to a locked area behind his studio. He reported observing dozens of human skulls stacked on shelves, each with a little etched design and presented with an air of respect rather than scientific curiosity. Smith stated that all of his documents were lawfully obtained from hospitals and medical institutions, and the police conducted a brief inquiry but discovered nothing that could be used against him. Although the reporting officer observed that Smith's workshop had a peculiar odor, not of decay, but of chemicals, as though great effort had been made to preserve what should naturally return to the earth, the investigation was concluded without charges. Before moving to Kansas City in 1917, Smith ran his company in Springfield. He opened a new workshop there, according to city directories and business records, and grew his company to provide specimens to medical schools across the Midwest. His exceptional quality and attention to detail, reputation, led to contracts with esteemed organizations such as the University of Kansas Medical School and Washington University in St. Louis. These establishments were unaware of the source of Smith's exceptional bone-working abilities. In an interview with Dr. Kaufman in 1963, a former apprentice noted that Smith occasionally talked about his early schooling while working through the night. The apprentice said that Smith had learned his craft from his father, who collected people's stories through their bones, and felt that the essence of a person resided in their skeleton, waiting to be read by those who knew how to listen. The apprentice also described a gruesome ritual he saw Smith engaging in when he felt alone. He would pick a bone from his personal collection, press it to his ear, and stand still for a few minutes, as if listening to something. He would then jot down his thoughts in a leather-bound journal that he kept locked in a drawer. Upon being asked about this conduct by the apprentice, Smith allegedly responded, "Every bone whispers the story of its owner. Some tell tales of joy, others of sorrow. The most interesting ones tell secrets their owners tried to take to their graves." Up to his passing in 1938, Smith's company was still doing well. He had no known surviving family and had left his estate to be divided among several medical institutions, according to his obituary in the Kansas City Star, which also called him a respected artisan in the specialized field of medical preparation, who had contributed significantly to medical education throughout the region. His early life and origins were not mentioned in the obituary. It's still unclear what will happen to Smith's private collection. His estate's inventory records show that the collection was not one of the items sent to the medical institutions. According to a 1,965 interview with a former neighbor, Smith had been visited multiple times in the weeks prior to his passing by a stern-looking woman who would come to his house late at night and take out a lot of boxes. According to the neighbor, the woman was elderly but remarkably strong, with eyes that seemed to look right through you. Descriptions of the Bone Lady that were circulated in several Ozark villages during the same time period are strikingly similar to this description. Clarence Jenkins, a local historian in Mountain View, Missouri, wrote of an elderly woman who resided in a secluded cabin close to town between 1935 and 1937. Jenkins continued, "The woman, who gave her name only as Martha, was known for her ability to treat ailments related to the bones and joints. Locals sought her help for everything from arthritis to broken limbs. She required unusual payment, a lock of hair, nail clippings, or in some cases, the extraction of a small unnecessary bone, such as a floating rib or a small toe joint, which she claimed hindered proper healing." Jenkins' narrative continues, "When she departed our community, several elderly residents who had been under her care were found deceased in their homes. Authorities ruled the deaths natural, as the deceased were all of advanced age and showed no signs of violence. However, subsequent burial preparation revealed that each body had been subtly altered, small incisions made and sutured, closed with remarkable skill. In each case, family members reported that certain bones appeared to be missing from the deceased, though no formal investigation was ever conducted. In 1941, the last known sighting of a woman thought to be Martha Harper took place in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. She would have been around 75 years old by now. An elderly woman known to the locals as Mother Bones spent a number of years living in a little cabin in the woods outside the town, according to stories in the local newspapers. Although she wasn't commonly seen, she was known to leave cures made from herbs and pulverized bone on sick inhabitants' doorsteps, frequently before they had made their ailments public. After a severe ice storm in the winter of 1941, a number of worried locals discovered the woman's cabin deserted. They found what the Eureka Springs Times-Echo called a museum of mortality inside the one-room home. Hundreds of bones of all sizes placed in concentric circles. A tiny wooden box with what looked to be a collection of children's teeth, each painstakingly labeled with a name and date, stood in the middle of these circles. The most unsettling was a journal with notes dating back decades that was discovered under a loose floorboard. The journal was turned over to local authorities, but before it could be thoroughly examined, it vanished from the evidence room. The last entry, dated the 18th of December 1941, said, "William is gone now. I felt his passing 3 nights ago. The collection calls me back to where it began. The circle must be completed." After initially obtaining the journal, the deputy sheriff resigned from his post and abruptly left the area. Without the efforts of Dr. Eleanor Kaufman, an anthropologist from the University of Missouri, who started studying Ozark folk traditions in 1960, the Harper case may have remained a little-known footnote in Ozark history. In local tradition, Dr. Kaufman frequently came across references to bone collectors during her fieldwork, households that allegedly gathered and kept human remains for enigmatic reasons. When she came across the county documents pertaining to the Harper family, she began to reconsider her initial dismissal of these tales as superstition. As part of her research, Dr. Kaufman spoke with dozens of senior citizens in the Ozarks who described experiences with people who fit William and Martha Harper's descriptions. A recurring theme emerged from these interviews. Both siblings seemed to have carried on their family's bone-collecting customs, albeit in different ways. William maintained his private collection and supplied medical specimens in a somewhat plausible corporate setting. Moving between isolated areas and gathering specimens through her profession as a healer, Martha used a more nomadic strategy. Dr. Kaufman's investigation revealed a troubling possibility. The Harpers were followers of a little-known custom that existed before they came to America. Similar customs had been documented among remote communities in the Carpathian Mountains of Eastern Europe, where some families were thought to act as keepers of the dead, preserving a few bones from departed community members to preserve a physical link between the living and their ancestors, according to documents she found in the American Folklore Society's archives. Dr. Kaufman's investigation revealed that this custom was founded on the idea that bones preserved the spirit or memory of their owners. The keepers allegedly obtained access to the collective wisdom and experiences of those people by gathering and conserving the bones of different people. The keeper has access to more collected wisdom the more varied the collection. According to Dr. Kaufman, this custom was brought to America by early European settlers and established itself in remote Appalachian and Ozark villages, where it developed into the customs followed by the Harper family. According to her, Thomas Harper had been a keeper in the conventional sense, gathering bones mostly from people who had already passed away. But as he tried to increase the size of his collection, his tactics had gotten more violent. Dr. Kaufman's finding that the Harper family was not unusual was the most concerning part of her investigation. Between the early 1800s and the middle of the 20th century, at least 7 other families in the Appalachian and Ozark regions participated in comparable activities. According to the evidence she found from her interviews and archival research, they all had secluded homesteads, an uncommon interest in anatomical study, and ties to local missing people, even though none of them had as much documentation as the Harper case. In a paper that appeared in a journal with a small circulation 1964, Professor Kaufman wrote, "These bone collector families appear to operate independently of one another. Though they share a common folkloric tradition, they typically maintain their practices for several generations before either abandoning them or meeting with violent ends, often at the hands of their own family members. What is perhaps most disturbing is the possibility that this tradition continues in the present day, adapted to modern circumstances, but retaining its essential character." When Dr. Kaufman took a sabbatical in 1968 to study comparable folklore in remote mountain villages in eastern Kentucky, her research abruptly came to an end. She was supposed to return after 6 months, but she never did, according to her department chair. No evidence of Dr. Kaufman herself was ever located, but her car was found parked at a trailhead outside Pineville, Kentucky, with her study materials neatly packed inside. According to the official assessment, she most likely had an accident while traveling alone in the difficult terrain. Interestingly, one of her belongings was a sealed packet that was meant to be opened only in the case that she vanished and was sent to her university department. It opened to reveal a single page with family names and locations across the Appalachian region, with a prominent circle around the Harper family. A quote from Martha Harper's journal, which had never appeared in Dr. Kaufman's published work, was written beneath the list. "The collection grows, but so does the hunger of the collectors. And when the old collectors can no longer satisfy their hunger, new collectors must take their place." The discovery of a tiny notepad with findings from Dr. Kaufman's most recent expedition in her glove compartment was even more fascinating. 3 days prior to her disappearance, the last entry detailed meeting an elderly woman in a secluded hollow who claimed to be Martha Harper's granddaughter. The diary claims that this woman asked Dr. Kaufman to see what she referred to as the family legacy, a collection that was allegedly started by Thomas Harper and carried on for 3 generations. According to Dr. Kaufman, Mrs. E. showed me to a root cellar beneath her kitchen, access through a trapdoor concealed under a rug. The space beyond defies easy description. Shelves line every wall, holding hundreds of bones, each meticulously labeled and arranged according to some system I cannot yet discern. Mrs. E claims these specimens speak to her, revealing the experiences and knowledge of their former owners. When I expressed skepticism, she selected a small finger bone from a drawer, pressed it to my forehead, and described with unsettling accuracy details of my childhood that I have never shared with anyone. She has invited me to return tomorrow for what she calls a proper education in listening to the bones. Despite my scientific reservations, I find myself compelled to accept. No further entries appear in the notebook. The final chance to speak with previous knowledge regarding her whereabouts. Based on her notes, authorities examined the neighborhood but were unable to find any residents that fit Mrs. E's description or any homes with a root cellar that fit Dr. Kaufman's description. Her corpse was never found, but the case was ultimately categorized as a likely accidental death. The Harper homestead has long since vanished, with the surrounding forest reclaiming the property. Locals still avoid the area, calling it simply Harper Hollow, and caution their children against going too far into those specific woods. In 1972, a hiking trail was proposed that would have passed near the property, but the project was abandoned after 2 surveyors working in the area reported feeling watched by something unseen and hearing the sound of something moving through the underbrush, following but never showing itself. Using topographical maps and county land records, a PhD student studying Ozark mythology tried to pinpoint the Harper homestead's precise location in 1985. He found a clearing that fit the Harper property's measurements and description based on his research notes. In the middle of this clearing, he found a circle of abnormally dense vegetation, the precise size of the root cellar under the Harper house, some 20 feet in diameter. According to reports, soil samples collected from this circle had high calcium phosphate levels, which is compatible with the long-term breakdown of bone material. As I was preparing to leave the site, I noticed something partially buried at the edge of the clearing. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be a small, hand-carved wooden box. Inside was a single human finger bone, yellowed with age, with what looked like tiny numbers etched into the surface. I replaced it exactly as I found it and left immediately. Some collections, I believe, are best left undisturbed, the student writes at the end of his research notes, a statement that still disturbs those who are familiar with the case. The University of Arkansas Medical Center in Little Rock reported an unusual medical episode in 1992. A 7-8-year-old woman with severe osteoporosis was admitted from a small Ozarks town. The woman had more than 30 tiny bone pieces implanted in the soft tissues throughout her body, mostly concentrated around her major joints and the base of her skull, which the doctors found during routine x-rays. What was more amazing was that these pieces did not resemble the structure of her own bones. Rather, they seemed to have come from several other people. The woman reportedly informed physicians that her grandmother had been a bone woman who had put the pieces there as a youngster to share the strength of others with her when she was asked about this oddity. She said it was a family tradition dating back generations and asked that some of her bones be preserved and given to her granddaughter so that the custom might continue after her death. Because of ethical concerns, medical staff did not publish the case's documentation in major medical journals. Although the woman's name was removed from the hospital records, Tenney, the county where the Harper family had resided, was reported as her birth county. This case begs the unsettling question of how the bone collector's methods may have changed over time. According to Dr. Kaufman's research, the Harper family did not abandon the custom. Rather, it evolved and persisted, evolving into ever more subtle forms as it was passed down from one generation to the next. Many rural settlements are isolated, especially those in hilly areas, which gives strange activities plenty of room to persist without being noticed by outside authorities. A number of unmarked burials from the mid-19th and early 20th centuries were discovered in 2002 during a regular archaeological survey that was carried out before a state highway was expanded close to the Stardies. Arkansas-Missouri border. The state of the remains, each skeleton was partial, with certain bones surgically removed, was what brought attention to these specific interment. The method of bone removal was consistent across all burials, according to the archaeologist who documented the site. This suggests a systematic practice, rather than sporadic grave robbery episodes. Because the conclusions were important, the report was immediately classified after being submitted to the State Historical Preservation Office. The finding of a tiny metal box between two of the graves was the most unsettling. Several human finger bones were found within, each engraved with tiny symbols that remarkably resembled the categorization scheme mentioned in descriptions of the Harper collection. The box and its contents were dated to the early 1900s by carbon dating, which is in line with when Martha Harper would have been working in the area. The location was covered over as originally intended when the archaeologist asked for resources to perform a more comprehensive analysis of the site. An unexpected finding was made in 2007 after a fire at a storage facility in Springfield, Missouri. A collection of early 20th century notebooks and specimen containers were among the damaged artifacts found in a long-abandoned unit. The notebooks included what seemed to be a system for documenting human remains, as well as thorough anatomical notes and drawings. From 1901 to 1935, the name W. Smith was listed on a number of the entries. On the inside cover of one diary, the most important was a family tree that traced a genealogy from Thomas and Eliza Harper to their son William, who had the notation Smith in parentheses, and onto those who lived in the Springfield region at the deportant day. Time the journal was last updated. This finding confirmed that William Harper had created a new identity after escaping the family homestead and offered the first hard proof connecting him to William Smith. Numerous tiny human bones were kept in the specimen containers, each painstakingly labeled with names, dates, and locations. Included with the collection was a handwritten note signed simply "A Harper," with no indication of which family member had written it or when the storage unit had first been rented, explaining that these specimens represented the accumulated wisdom of 3 generations, preserved for those who know how to listen. After seizing the materials, the local authorities tried to identify the people listed on the family tree, but discovered that the majority had either passed away or moved, leaving no forwarding addresses. In the end, the diaries were kept as evidence in what was referred to as a historical investigation with no active suspects, while the bones were given to the state medical examiner's office for appropriate burial. Researchers are still plagued by the question of whether the Harper tradition actually came to an end with these discoveries, or if it is still going strong now. Many rural towns in the Appalachian and Ozark regions are remote, which makes it easy for odd behaviors to continue unnoticed. According to Dr. Kaufman's research, the bone collectors were flexible enough to adjust their practices to fit shifting conditions while preserving the fundamental elements of their custom. An uncommon trend among senior patients in some communities was noted by a hospice nurse in rural Arkansas in 2015. According to her, family members would frequently want to be left alone with the corpse for a few hours before funeral homes were called, and upon closer inspection, tiny, expertly crafted cuts would occasionally be seen close to joints or the base of the skull. Family members usually gave the vague explanation that these marks were due to old-time traditions or family customs when asked. After recording her findings, the nurse gave the report to her supervisor, who then sent it on to the state's health authorities. Since the customs seemed to be limited to a few interrelated families who were reluctant to share them with others, a study was started but produced conflicting findings. Since no law expressly forbids the removal of minor bone fragments from deceased family members with the family's approval, the investigation was ultimately closed because there was no proof of any crime. Whatever custom the Harper family followed may endure in a modified form, adjusted to contemporary situations while maintaining its fundamental qualities, according to this instance. If this is the case, the bone collectors are not merely a historical oddity, but rather a live tradition that has endured for many generations by eluding the general public's attention. There is one last, terrifying detail from local tradition. Some people in Tenney and Stone counties still tell stories about how during the darkest part of the moon, if you went far enough into the woodlands surrounding what used to be Harper territory, you may hear the sound of someone meticulously setting small, hard things in place. A woman's voice is reported to accompany the sound, softly repeating dates and names, as if listing them in a ledger. According to those who claim to have heard it, this voice is deliberate and concentrated, rather than menacing or malicious. It is the sound of someone working on a task they believe to be significant, necessary, and never finished. Think about this today as you travel through the Ozarks' twisting roads, past remote homesteads, and tiny towns. Not all collectors put on exhibit their collections. Some people conceal them in places under floorboards, in walls, or in root cellars. Additionally, some collections, once established, grow hungry on their own and need to be nourished for generations to come, even after the original collectors have joined someone else's collection. The Harper case is more than simply a grim tale from the frontier past for scholars who research the hidden histories of rural America. It provides insight into the murky areas where official history and lived experience diverge, where customs and beliefs that are deemed impractical or unimaginable by the majority may persist in remote areas. Transmitted from one generation to the next, through secret rituals and whispered instructions. We may still have the bone collectors you never knew existed, their hands steady as they meticulously categorize, clean, and preserve the tangible archives of human existence. Unnoticed by everyone but those who know exactly what to look for, the subtle indications of a tradition that has persevered in the face of adversity, adjusting and changing while staying faithful to its fundamental purpose. Their labor goes on in quiet and shadow. Additionally, you may occasionally hear the sound of bone, touching bone, during the peaceful hours of the night when the wind is blowing through the hollow spaces of the world. This sound is as old as mankind itself and carries echoes of stories that were never supposed to be told but refused to be kept silent. An old woman in a remote part of Shannon County, Missouri, told a retired anthropologist studying folk medicine in the Ozarks in 2018 that her family had been keepers of memory for many generations. The woman declined to elaborate, but said her grandmother had learned the practice from a traveling bone woman in the early 1942, and that some families were entrusted with preserving the knowledge and experiences of their communities through what she called physical repositories. The woman's grandmother had temporarily resided in Eureka Springs during the time that Mother Bones was known to do so, the anthropologist later learned. This link raises the possibility that Martha Harper's impact went beyond her close relatives, establishing a network of practitioners who continued the custom in different ways. When the anthropologist returned to the region, she had moved and had no forwarding address, despite the anthropologist's best efforts to set up a follow-up interview. According to her neighbors, she abruptly left after getting a letter that seemed to deeply upset her. Throughout the history of people associated with the Harper tradition, this pattern of abrupt departures and calculated relocations has been present. It points to a network that keeps in touch while purposefully being dispersed and hard to track down, a survival tactic that has worked for them for more than a century. In 2020, a Tenney County historical preservation effort discovered a set of 1,892 county coroner's records that had been long neglected and misfiled in a courthouse basement. A more thorough analysis of the Harper family remains found by James Wilkins in 1897 was one of these. Dr. Lawrence Williams, the study's author, pointed out a number of irregularities that the official sheriff's report had overlooked. The remains of Thomas and Eliza Harper, according to Dr. Williams, revealed evidence of small, exact extractions at important locations in their skeletons. A part of the temporal bone, close to the ear canal, the first joint of the right index finger, and the atlas vertebrae at the top of the spine. These extractions seem to have been done post-mortem, with sophisticated instruments and a great deal of skill. The skeletons of the three younger children showed similar extractions. Most importantly, Dr. Williams pointed out that a tiny piece of bone from a different family member was inserted into the mouth cavity of each set of remains. With tiny inscriptions carved into their surfaces, these pieces seem to have been purposefully polished and molded. Dr. Williams concluded by writing, "These modifications suggest a ritual significance beyond mere murder. The careful extraction of specific bones and the placement of foreign bone fragments in the oral cavities indicate a systematic practice with a specific intent, though the nature of this intent remains obscure." Dr. Williams suggested more research, but local authorities seemed eager to wrap up the case and disregarded his advice, until it was rediscovered over a century later His report was forgotten and put aside. Dr. Williams himself had long since died by then, taking with him any further insights he might have had. This report's rediscovery sparked a resurgence of interest in the Harper case among Ozark folklore historians and anthropologists. Dr. Melissa Chen of the University of Arkansas was one such researcher who started gathering examples of comparable activities that had been documented across the area. Her research uncovered a recurring pattern of bone-related traditions that were mostly practiced in remote villages with little interaction with the outside world and existed on the periphery of society. The belief that certain bones retained the essence or memory of their owners, the custom of removing these memory bones after death, the practice of shaping and marking these bones with symbols specific to each keeper, and the tradition of passing down the collected bones and the knowledge of their use from one generation to the next, usually along female lines, are some of the key characteristics that Dr. Chen documented and that were consistent across these reports. What was most fascinating was that Dr. Chen found that many of these stories shared a common theme: mentions of a traveling woman who had brought or strengthened these customs in several places in the early to mid-20th century. Although stories of this woman varied in detail, they all referred to her extraordinary understanding of skeletal anatomy and her demand to be paid in small pieces of bone rather than cash. Dr. Chen's research led her to suggest that Martha Harper had purposefully dispersed her family's customs throughout the area, establishing a scattered network of practitioners who shared the fundamental ideas while customizing the practices to suit their unique situations. According to Dr. Chen, this network could have been used to safeguard and maintain the custom at times of heightened danger or scrutiny. In order to conduct in-person interviews with living practitioners of these traditions, Dr. Eve Chen made an effort in 2021. The majority of possible respondents either refused to participate or just gave hazy, broad information. Therefore, her efforts were not very successful. One elderly woman in a distant part of Madison County, Arkansas, however, consented to an interview with the understanding that her identity would be kept private and that specifics of her practice would not be included in any published works. Dr. Chen's field notes state that this woman identified herself as a bone listener, a person who can elicit memories or information from a deceased person's bones. She asserted that this talent was a taught skill that had been passed down through the generations of women in her family rather than a supernatural one. According to her, the procedure included more than just keeping bones intact. It also entailed a sophisticated attunement process that gave the keeper access to the memories they held. Her explanation of how this custom has been upheld in the contemporary times was the most illuminating. In contrast to the Harper family's overt collection methods, modern listeners usually acquired their specimens through more socially acceptable channels, such as employment in funeral homes, medical settings, or archaeological settings that permitted lawful access to human remains. Instead of gathering from strangers, others had modified their methods to concentrate mostly on personal or family remnants, keeping little pieces of departed family members. The woman also spoke to the existence of a loose network of practitioners across the area, bound together by shared customs and familial ties rather than by official organizations. She spoke about yearly meetings, where listeners would share specimens and information at various venues. As Dr. Chen inquired about the network's beginnings, the woman reports of strange occurrences at the Harper homestead site itself have persisted. A party of hikers who entered the region in 2022 spite of local cautions, claimed to have discovered a clearing that fit the Harper property's description. They found what looked to be the remnants of a stone foundation in the middle of this area, which may have been the base of the root cellar mentioned in the past. Their discovery of a circle of little cairns encircling this foundation, each containing what they initially believed to be animal bones, was even more unsettling. When they examined the bones more closely, they discovered that they were human finger and toe phalanxes, each bearing little symbols. The hikers informed local authorities of their discovery, but when sheriff's officers got to the designated spot, they discovered impenetrable forest, devoid of any recent human activity, as well as no clearing, foundation, or cairns. There has never been a satisfactory explanation for this disparity. The hikers All seasoned outdoor enthusiasts who knew the area well stuck to the exact locations they had noted and the veracity of their claim. While some have offered more strange explanations, others have argued that they simply grew lost in the new area. This episode has been woven into the Harper legend by local tradition, which holds that the site itself emerges and disappears based on an enigmatic pattern that only the bone collectors want to expose to others. We may never know the entire scope of the Harper family's operations. Several volumes of the period's county records are missing or destroyed, making them incomplete. Although it is difficult to pinpoint exactly how many travelers went missing in the Ozark region during the Harper family's stay, newspaper reports from Springfield, Missouri and Little Rock, Arkansas, indicate that the number may have been significant, possibly as many as 30 people over a 15-year period. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Harper case is not what we know, but rather what is yet unknown. According to Drs. Kaufman and Chen's research, the Harpers were not the only ones. Rather, they were a part of a larger tradition that has silently continued into the present day. Many rural settlements are remote, especially those in mountainous areas, which gives odd behaviors plenty of room to persist without being noticed by outside authorities. The Harper mystery was further complicated in 2023 by an unanticipated finding. Workers in Kansas City discovered a concealed chamber in the basement wall of an old building that had formerly been William Smith's workshop while renovating the structure. There was a metal box with what looked to be personal belongings, a journal, a pocket watch, and a set of small, specialized instruments that were probably used for working with bones. From 1896 until 1925, the journal seemed to be William Harper Smith's private diary, apart from his business records. It was written with great care and included his ideas about what he referred to as the family practice, as well as his attempts to modify it for the times. The most telling were his references to continued correspondence with his sister Martha, whom he referred to as the true keeper of our tradition. The journal states that William and Martha remained in touch throughout their lives, exchanging specimens and information while taking distinct stances on their common ancestry. William concentrated on research and preservation, creating ever more advanced methods for organizing and caring for his collection. According to one entry from 1918, M. reports success in the southern counties. She has identified 7 potential apprentices, 3 showing particular promise. The tradition spreads, though none will know its true source. We remain, as always, in the shadows of our own creation. Martha, on the other hand, placed an emphasis on transmission and expansion, traveling throughout the region to find and train others who might become listeners. William's rising anxiety about the practice's future is also evident in the journal. The hazards of discovery increased, and the options for collection decreased as contemporary medicine and society grew more intertwined. In order for their job to continue unnoticed in a world that is changing, William wrote on the necessity of adapting and finding new contexts and approaches. His answer, as outlined in early 1922 notes, was to establish a valid front for their operations, a foundation that would fund medical research and instruction while granting them access to the specimens they were looking for. This charity, which he named the Smith Anatomical Trust, would function as a provider of instructional resources to research facilities and medical schools, enabling him to keep his collection intact while remaining unseen. The journal's last pages include what looks to be a coded letter to Martha that lists the sites across the Ozark region where parts of their collection had been concealed for protection. Although some of the sentences imply hidden caches in isolated locations that have not been disturbed to this day, the code, which is based on anatomical language, has so far eluded all attempts at full decipherment. The most concrete proof yet of the intentional, planned character of the Harper siblings' actions after their escape from the family estate can be found in this journal. It implies an intentional attempt to maintain and grow a custom they valued, even if it was clearly against the law and social conventions, rather than a haphazard continuance of family insanity. Whether William and Martha Harper were the last of their line or if they were successful in passing on their knowledge and methods to a new generation is the subject that haunts researchers to this day. According to the stories of the Bone Lady and the data that Dr. Chen found they were at least somewhat effective, and their tradition is still practiced in the remote Ozark communities, modified to fit contemporary needs while maintaining its fundamental elements. If this is accurate, there might still be people in isolated areas of the area who keep private collections of meticulously preserved human bones, each identified by name and date, and thought to carry the essence of its previous owner. Thomas Harper and his family would probably not look much like these contemporary bone collectors. They may be well-respected members of the community, doctors, funeral directors, or archaeologists whose private practices are justified by their lawful access to human remains. The most unsettling possibility is that Martha Harper's network has developed into something more structured and extensive than the remote family custom it started off as. According to Dr. Chen's research, there may be ties between practitioners in different states who share methods and ideologies, fostering a unified tradition in spite of geographic distance. If this network is still in operation, it is not merely a historical curiosity, but a living tradition that has endured by adjusting to shifting conditions while preserving its fundamental principles. One final terrifying detail is provided by local legend. If you go far enough into the trees around what was once Harperland during the darkest part of the moon, you may hear the sound of someone meticulously placing small, hard things. According to legends that are still spoken in portions of Tenney and Stone counties, a woman's voice is reported to accompany the sound, softly repeating dates and names, as if listing them in a ledger. According to those who claim to have heard it, this voice is deliberate and concentrated, rather than menacing or malicious. It is the sound of someone working on a task they believe to be significant, necessary, and never finished.